These four esteemed panelists will be addressing the question, why, for heaven's sake, should one collaborate, if at all? I mean, the question I could ask Jörn is, Jörn, why would you go, or why haven't you gone? Can I have the mic here, please? Yes, okay. Can you hear me? No? Yes, now it's better again. So why haven't you gone into a partnership, for example, with a big pharma company? Wouldn't that have increased your chances? Well, think about it. I'm going to ask that question later on, because you just were talking. Think about it. I'm going to ask Philippe and Alvin, why are Pfizer and GSK entering the rare disease space? Totally unforeseen. And I'm going to ask Frederic, what are your plans for entering that space? But before doing that, just to provoke the discussion, 3 slides. Can I have the slides, please? I think this could be one of the reasons. The patent cliff. Big companies are losing a lot of revenues for major products. And what's then a solution if you don't have revenues from big products anymore? You might go, this one here. Next slide, please. You're right, Karen, it doesn't work very well. Oh, Karen has gone. Oh, here. You might go into so-called emerging markets, because that is an untapped territory in order to get more revenues from those markets. You might say, well, I want to leave this so-called red ocean where all the other companies are. I'm going into the blue ocean where nobody else is working. In other words, I'm leaving the traffic jam of today and I'm going to an unbeaten track where nobody else is, the rare disease space. Or even worse, I'm going to build the road myself because nobody else has been there yet. Philippe, can I ask you, what's your main reason why GSK entered the rare disease space?
Yeah, maybe the first answer is that we didn't enter the rare diseases space. Oh. That it's not new to GSK. And that was one of the reasons actually why last year we put together a special unit dedicated to it. So indeed we have probably gone far in the model with an integrated business unit fully dedicated to rare diseases that has been put together last year, 1.5 years ago now. But we are building on a very strong heritage. And if you look at the number of orphan drugs approved in the US by the FDA, you would see that GSK was already in the leading position. So we have a strong heritage to leverage. That's one thing. The other thing is that, yes, the medical need obviously is there. Everybody would agree. But then you would say, yeah, but why now? Why now going to the next level and being even more ambitious? I think the reason is definitely that the technology is there and the science is there to make it happen and to go to the next level. And I can tell you from my very personal experience, so before being head of R&D for GSK Rare Disease, I was head of global vaccine development with GSK. And this is a fantastic success story that I've been extremely lucky to be part of that success story of the vaccines. And if I go back to when I started in the vaccine business in 1998, it was just a good business, a good small business within GSK. And nobody was really looking at us, neither the financial community or the scientific community, whatever. We were just doing well. And over time, the science was there, the technology was there, and the scientists of the vaccine business had done, well, the scientists many years before, had taken the right choices in terms of technologies. And that was paying off, and that's how we have launched year after year, one or more vaccines every year over the last years, and we have grown from 2,000 people in 1998 when I joined. Well, there are now more than 11,000 employees working in the vaccine business. So I think what it shows, and they became the #1 in vaccines worldwide. I think it was really thanks to the technology and the science, and it was identifying the right moment to go to the next level. So I hope we can do that now in rare diseases as well.
Great answer. Alvin, Pfizer.
So Hans, thank you for bringing up the issue of patent expiries. I'll just point out that today is a very auspicious and symbolic day in the history of Pfizer. Today is actually the day that Lipitor goes off patent. Today. So that giant sucking sound that you hear is coming from Pfizer's income statement.
What's the revenue base, Alvin? What's the revenue base right now?
Let's just say it was a very successful medicine. Okay. But I think the way you have to look at this is that it's really an opportunity for us to refocus and to go on to the next chapter. And just like Philippe was saying, A company like Pfizer already has a presence in rare diseases. So we have a commercial presence in hemophilia and several other diseases, and we've had a very active pipeline that we've been advancing through clinical stages. And so that's just going to become more important for us as a company. And I'd say the reason we're in that space is, again, we're following the science. And the fact that you have monogenic diseases where you understand where in the disease pathway you have to intervene gives us more confidence in going into those areas. We think that the probability of success is higher, and the clinical impact is going to be higher. And you combine the advances in science with the fact that you have a relatively favorable regulatory environment. You also have others who have validated the business model before us. I think it makes it a very favorable place to be.
I'm sure that Jörn would like to react to this part of the favorable regulatory process.
I said relatively favorable.
Sorry. Sorry. I'll come back. Jörn, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I will not repeat the story on regulatory. I've done enough of this afternoon, I think. Does this work? Yeah. No? Yeah, now it works. So I will not repeat the regulatory process. So, the question was, why have we not decided to partner with pharma companies yet? I believe that gene therapy actually is of really huge benefit for patients because it does provide cure with the one-time treatment long-term. If you look at the potential of gene therapy, and to be in it, I think is fantastic. However, it has been very complex in the past, and pharma companies have actually given up in the years early 2000 with some bad incidences, their activities in gene therapy for quite some time. And when I entered AMT 2 years ago, there was hardly anybody in the pharmaceutical industry who wanted to hear about gene therapy. And why force someone to their luck? I couldn't, and I don't think it's very wise to do it. So what we did is we looked at our strengths, and AMT's strength definitely is at a place where we are unique for the time being. I know that others are working on this, but it's the ability to actually produce, manufacture, quality and quantity required for phase 3 or for market launch. And who needs that? The people who have the best scientific programs, and often you find those in academia. So all our relationships that I've shown earlier are actually academic relationships where we have the chance to see academia provide a proof of concept in animals at least, or in humans, and where they then ask the question, well, how do we get that to patients? And the first question that pops up then is, who can manufacture it? And then they come to us, we team up, work together. And this is the case for us in the GDNF program. It's in hemophilia, where actually, up to now, academia has paid for the trials that have run so far. We have not had to invest into it. So we are partnering at a place where people don't need to be forced to their luck.
Okay, very good, very good. Frédéric, I mean, you showed very nicely that some of your future challenges will be on how to deal with the public-funded program in terms of making it available. Do you consider a partnership with Pfizer or GSK, with anyone here?
When we started investing in R&D for rare disorders 20 years ago, our position that it was such a desert from an industry perspective, except for some specific drugs that we were, what our intimate thought was that if we didn't build it by ourselves, it would just not happen. So we are now at a stage where we build pipelines of different types of programs, gene therapy, cell therapy, stem cell research. And we have built the infrastructure to bring those compounds to the market by ourselves if needed. On the other hand, what we understand and what we are quite conscious of is that bringing those products to the market is a specific expertise that we might not be experts into, that it's an expensive step. However, we do consider it as our mission to do it. Partnering with pharma companies is, of course, an option we're considering. We will have to do it somehow in the respect of our mission, that is, being sure that these drugs make it to the market, so that, when we partner with an industrial partner, it's really to make it happen, that make sure it accelerates the development. And also it's made, and something that we were discussing earlier, in the respect of the individual donator, we have a responsibility towards the individual French donors in our case, and make sure that we properly explain the day we go into industrial partnership that whatever the individual donor has invested in giving to AFM is now transformed into a drug, and the industrial partner is not, is benefiting, but benefiting in a positive way from what was done. So clearly, we have to deal both with the economic equation. This is going to be more and more expensive as we move down the road, with the expertise, and we know that there's expertise out there we could benefit from. But on the other hand, we have to deal with the communication question that, of course, for a public-based organization such as ours is clearly an important point.
Good point.
Can I react further on one thing, because I guess we also need to manage the expectations of rare diseases. We used to say, and you were telling us that, and I've heard that many times, that there is some interest, some attractivity in rare diseases because it's supposed to be cheap, fast, regulatory incentives, easy to register, easy to put on the market. Well, we have seen a good example just before this panel discussion. I think we need to indeed to realize that it's not always that easy. Well, you and I, Hans, know what it is with our program. We are also facing difficulties with the regulatory authorities, with the clinical program, with everything, and that's normal. So I think we need to indeed to manage expectations. That's probably one more reason to collaborate between a biotech and a big pharma organization, to just put together our respective expertise.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point, and I will take back what I said about GSK not being present in this space, but I just want to share a secret story with you. When I left Genzyme about 3.5 years ago, I had my farewell dinner, and then at the dinner, my boss said, "Hans, we hate to see you leave from Genzyme, but don't worry, we'll take you back at Presenza at a price later on." So I was confident that I would have a deal with Genzyme just a couple of months later, and then we had a contact with GSK. Who are you, GSK, to be interested in the space? And you're right, the biggest number, the largest number of orphan drugs was actually with GSK in the cancer space, in the oncology space. I saw a question at the end there, yes. You are really looking for this chocolate, I know. This is Gregory.
I love Toblerone. No, one statement and then one question. I'm not sure where the French woman went. Oh, Karen, you are totally cool. That was just a great presentation. Your presentation, totally cool. Don't give up. That was amazing. That's not a question, but thank you. For Jorn, on the venture capital side, what are you seeing in terms of patient groups stepping up? You have a small community. Is anyone coming in as an angel? Or are you also considering looking at big pharma as a venture source, at Novartis Ventures or at Roche Ventures? Instead of a collaboration on the operating side, can you collaborate simply on the venture investment, early stage angel side with big pharma?
It's a very quick answer, yes. Obviously, we would do that because the corporate venture funds are oftentimes longer-term investors. In our specific situation, we have a runway that takes us into early Q1, and we have strong support from our existing VCs, and we will go forward with them and see the company funded that way. But I think it is very interesting to look in our space at sources of funds that have a long-term perspective and that have an interest in seeing products through. And naturally, the corporate venture capital funds, as the corporates themselves, are the good partners for this. And therefore, we would not exclude it. We would look for that as well, as we would obviously be looking for partnerships under the right circumstances.
Alvin, you want to react as well? Do you know anything about the venture arm of Pfizer as well? Whether they're more interested in rare diseases as a result of your efforts in this space?
Yeah, I would say the Pfizer venture arm, there is a venture arm. It tends to operate a little bit differently than the venture arms of other pharma companies. I think the remit of our venture group is to really look outside of those strategic areas where we have active programs. Mm-hmm. And so most of the funding and support would come from our group.
I see. I saw a question there on the fourth row from the front. Left side for you. Right side.
Great, thank you. As a small company, we indeed are also interested in partnership with the larger companies, and I could imagine that indeed the AMT case could have been different by partnering with a large company that even has individual national contacts with CHMP members. On the other hand, I can also see that a small company has advantages, and I could imagine in the discussions that the Procensors have with GSK or with Pfizer, actually the same with smaller companies, that there's less cutting corners. There is the large companies maybe are not going as fast to the market as small companies would like to. Is that something you, and on the question is to Pfizer and GSK, is that something you experience? Is there also tension with the larger part of the company to try to cut corners as a rare disease unit?
Yeah, well, so maybe I should take that. I think in rare diseases, more than in any other area, we should go. Indeed, as I said, it's not always easy, but we all dream of going fast and indeed have a different development pathway. So we definitely need to be creative, for sure. We need to work a lot with regulatory authorities all along the development path, because that's very important to make sure that we share what you want to do and make sure that you have them on board and you have them buying in any creativity. I think there can be lessons from what we do in rare diseases to the rest of the big R&D in the big pharma organizations, because that's also the future. There is a trend towards personalized medicine in oncology. There is a trend towards smaller target population in different areas anyway, and a trend towards more creativity. So we should do that. Now, one thing that Jan told us is that you should try to have the commitment of when you go for scientific advice. Yeah, you should try, but unfortunately, from a legal perspective, this is non-binding. So it's not like at the FDA. The FDA, at the end of phase 2 meeting and even before, there are different milestones. When you visit them, what is said remains. They can always change their mind. They have some flexibility, but this is much more binding. And in the case of the EMA, that's a conversation that I had a few times in the past with Thomas Lundgren when he was the head of EMA. And I made that point, and I think we should all continue to make the point that scientific advice should become more binding and more robust, so that we would have that commitment. But at this stage, there is no legal obligation. So all you can do is to have regular dialogue with them. That's the best you can do.
Go ahead.
I would just like to add to this. I think having someone involved who has an intimate knowledge of the regulatory process and also knows people in the environment. So with an orphan drug, you have to go the centralized procedure, and you're actually talking to all the different nations in Europe, is helpful. However, there is a difference between orphan drugs that the big pharma companies typically talk about versus those that many of us develop. You're typically not talking about patient populations of 1,000, but you're talking, for example, Duchenne and the Prosensa case, where you have 40,000, 50,000 patients. And when you get to the small-sized populations here, it may be very difficult to attract the pharmaceutical help in this. And you have to do it yourself. And I think you just have to be creative and pushy.
Yeah, maybe just quickly to react on that one. This is not completely correct. And it's great to see that a company like GSK can work in ultra-rare indications. So as Hans showed, even in Duchenne, we are talking about a small part of Duchenne because it's one program after the other for a subpopulation. But also the other programs that we have, well, we have one phase 3 program in Fabry. We have one phase 3 program in AD-SCID, gene therapy, with the Italian Telethon, and I can tell you more about that. And we have a series of options for programs in gene therapy in ultra-rare conditions. So it's not completely true that we are just looking at the most frequent ones.
Yeah, I would agree with Philippe, and if I could respond to Willem's point as well. There's a constant tension there, isn't there? And you really have to strike a balance between, completely pushing the gas pedal and being more circumspect with regard to the development plan. And I think that's where we really learn from the experience of our potential partners. Whenever we get deep into a discussion with our partner, a lot of times, we learn about the shortcuts that are taken, and we learn about that side of it. Because as you said, biotechs tend to go fast. Big pharma tends to move kind of slow, right? Because one thing that Tim Cote, the former head of the FDA Orphan Office Product Development, says is, big pharma can't deliver a gallon of gas without using a supertanker. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And so a part of the process of doing orphan drug development is that it's an adaptive process, and we learn from the experience of people who have pushed forward relatively rapidly in the space, and we actively try to internalize that. And we don't always try to insist that the way we do things is the right way, because we realize that we come with a certain inherent bias, which is the big pharma way of doing things.
Just an anecdote from my side. When we entered into the collaboration with GSK, we were very much encountering meetings and trying to get meetings with Dr. Katz, the head of the neurology division at the FDA. And when we first met GSK after the agreement, they said, "Oh, you mean Rusty?" I didn't know his name was Rusty, but GSK is with these people on a first name basis, Rusty. They see him probably every week. We see Dr. Katz only once every year, so it does make a difference. So, Frederik, is it Dr. Katz for you, or is it Rusty for you?
Well, let me think about it. Let's make it Rusty.
No, but that's the point, of course. I mean, in trying to get eventually approval, getting your trials on place, do you have the infrastructure in place to really go all the way?
So for the types of indications we're looking at, which for the time being are ultra-orphan, we believe that we do have the infrastructures in place to move it down the way and to make the product available to the patient. The type of indication like Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome or chronic granulomatosis, we're talking about, hundreds of patients worldwide. We're talking about a very limited number of hospital centers. So clearly here we have the capability of delivering the drug to the end patient. When we're talking about Duchenne, as was mentioned by Jörn, we're talking about thousands, tens of thousands of patients. And clearly here we will have to make the strategic decision of whether we go with a pharma partner or whether we build it internally. Yeah. But clearly we will not be allowed to leave it in the middle of nowhere.
A question at the front there? No, we still have. Philippe has to leave at 5:30, and I would like to close the session at between 5:20 and 5:25. So go ahead.
Does it work? Does it work?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. It was already mentioned on the Duchenne, and also you mentioned it, Hans, that Duchenne, of course, you have different products that are all on the different exons. And when I hear the story from Jörn Aldag, I also get the feeling, well, you have this one AAV vector, and you put in one gene and you put in another gene, safety-wise, that shouldn't make a difference. How can we start convincing the regulatory agencies that these products are all the same? So the one pro is the same as the other pro. Is there already any progress that you can share with us on, okay, this is what their response is, and if we do it like this, with commitment, by the way, then it's okay. Because otherwise, we have to go on and on and on and do all the new trials with all the expenses on top of that. And especially can also other patient initiatives can also profit from that. So whoever wants to.
Anyone feels?
I can, just one point. I can tell you, for instance, that on retinal disorders, where we start having some backlog now, when we ask the question of what does it take in terms of preclinical regulatory studies, what does it take in terms of design of phase 1 studies, there's clearly a goodwill from the regulatory in France, in the UK, in the United States to build upon the existing data that have been generated by different groups in order to make the path smooth and easy. So not meaning that we can do, that it has to be, that it is very simple, but clearly there is the will to restrict whatever large animal studies need to be done, whatever preclinical studies need to be done, taking into account both what's published in the literature and what has already been done. So from this perspective, I see a quite positive, at least for the clinical trials. Then registration is something else. But for the registration, and here I know that we have a slight disagreement with Jörn, I think that it will be more difficult to get drugs registered if they're not for a clearly life-threatening indication. If you're not addressing a life-threatening disease, well, your discussions with the authorities just might be a bit more difficult. At least that's the position we have, and that's the approach we have. And that's probably one small disagreement that we have, a small discrepancy that we have with Jorn on that point.
I don't see the disagreement. I would agree with you that if you have a lethal disease, it's obviously easier than when you have something that you could call a lifestyle drug. I would like to just make that point. We're concentrating at AMT now on AAV5 for, in particular, that reason, to get the productivity from just using one vector and putting different genes in and piggybacking results and data that you have generated somewhere else. If you discuss this concept with Dr. Schneider from the CAT, he will be very open for the discussion. And he understands it, and he is committed to actually helping you to progress forward. And we will find in the agency significant support for these kinds of ideas. At the same time, I would caution us that it's happening tomorrow. We have seen strong support from Kat and Schneider at various points, which then could not be pulled through. And I think the agency is actually taking much longer to adapt to these almost obvious things than what you would hope. Yet it is encouraging that you find in the agency people who think that way and who are in general non-committal but very supportive in thinking these things through and giving you indications how you might benefit from their knowledge in the regulatory process. But then again, you're left to yourself to maneuver through it.
I'd like to close the session with the very last question to our 4 panelists, and the answer should be in 3 seconds. It's either yes or no, that's easy. And the question is to P or not to P, to partner or not to partner, and I leave it up to you to think about who the partner would be. But in order to be successful in the orphan space, to P or not to P? Frederic?
I would say yes.
Alvin?
Yes.
Philippe?
Yes, 3 phase 3 programs out of 3.
Okay, Jörn?
Yes.
Well, that's what I call a very unanimous panel. Thank you very much for our panel.